The time is now 10 o'clock, and today is Monday, August the 14th. This is a meeting of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board. It has been duly posted, and we'll call this meeting to order. Our first item on the agenda is the Pledges of Allegiance, and I have asked Alex to lead us in those.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Our next item is roll call.
Chair Jamie Wycliffe.
Present.
Jim Jeffries.
Present.
Lester Renfro.
Present.
Clayton Black.
Present.
Chance Bolton.
Present.
Tony Pinion.
Present.
Martha Gale Reed Lynch.
Present.
Alex Solstrick.
Present.
Joyce Unity.
Here. Present, sorry.
It's all right. We like the individual responses. Agenda item number 3 is the appointments to the AMC Advisory Committee. I believe the best information we have is that we will not anticipate appointments until after this special legislative session.
That is correct.
So no action on agenda item number 3. The item number 4 is the appointments to the Working Committee for the Texas ACE course. I believe at one of the previous meetings, I'm not exactly sure, maybe our last meeting, I was authorized with the authority to make those appointments, and I have reviewed the applications. I propose the following individuals to serve on the working group for the Texas ACE course: Candy Cook, Tony Pastilli, Joe Waller, Greg Stevens, and Robbie Wilson. I have made contact with most of those individuals confirming their continued willingness to serve, so we look forward to advancing that very important working group. Does the board have any questions about the appointments? Okay. And we'll move to the appointments to the Facilities Working Group. This is the proposed building project that we are in partnership with the Texas Real Estate Commission on. Several of the board, we have an absence on our working group, just by virtue of the fact that we have new faces serving on the board. Several of you volunteered to serve. Previously, this position was held by a single individual. I'm going to request that the commissioner work with Alex Alejandro and Chance Bolton as our working group members for the Facilities Working Group. Both of those individuals have been expressed a willingness to continue their interest in that working group, so we look forward to seeing some progress on those fronts.
Happy to do so, and thank you to both of them for volunteering.
The next item on our agenda is a public comments section. This is for comments, an opportunity for anybody in the audience willing to make public comments regarding non-agenda items. Is there anyone that would like to address the board? Mr. Stevens. Good morning.
My name is Greg Stevens. I am the president of Foundation Appraisers Coalition of Texas.
Is that on?
Is it on?
Now it is.
There we go.
No?
How about that? Oh, there we go. All right. Okay, so again, my name is Greg Stevens. I'm the president of Foundation Appraisers Coalition of Texas, which is the coalition of appraisers in the state that actually do facilitate the legislative changes for the TALCB board. And in this past legislative session, we did have an AMC cleanup bill on Statute 1104. We did discuss that at our board meeting. We had a membership and board meeting this past Saturday in Round Rock. Our legislative lobbyist was there. We recapped that, and we were very pleased with the results of that. We did get it through the House, through the Senate, signed by the governor. so it goes into place, and we appreciate working with the TALC board, and we're looking forward to working with you on anything that might come up for either 1103 under the Appraiser statute or 1104, any statutory changes to the AMC bill in the 2019 session. And again, we're very pleased with the relationship that we have, and we look forward to continuing to work with the TALC board.
And Greg, we very much appreciate your contribution as well as the entire FACT group. They are critical to our ability to move forward in the state of Texas, and so we feel very lucky to have the quality of voice that we have through the FACT group. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to address the board on a non-agenda item? Hearing none, we'll move to the consent agenda. We actually have two items, the ratification of the official record, and then, of course, all of the complaint items. I believe there are 6 of those. I'll remind the board, if you have questions about anything on the consent agenda, you should request it be pulled from the consent agenda. We will address it as a separate line item and can approve anything else on the consent agenda. That being said, I'd like to pull item 8E, complaint number 16274, Edwin Gregory White. Are there any other items anyone would like to discuss, either in executive session or open session? Hearing none, then certainly will accept a motion regarding the consent agenda.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the agreed final orders and surrenders in the matter of A8, A, B, C, D, and F as presented by staff.
I actually just need any chance I could get you to amend that, Mr. Black, to approve the entire consent agenda with the exception of item 8E?
Yes, do I need to restate it? So we approve the entire section 8 with the exception of 8E.
Thank you.
And item 7.
We're approving items 7 and 8 with the exception of 8E is the motion, as I understand it.
That's correct.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Black, a second by Mr. Pena. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously. My question for 8E is simple and I believe can be handled in open session and no need for executive session. It's simply an observation that the correspondence that created this issue apparently was correspondence from a financial institution, and in every other case where I see an agreed final order, there's actually a complaint filed by the financial institution. I just wondered if there was some nuance there.
Madam Chair, board members, Troy Bollier, Director of Standards and Enforcement Services. We occasionally do get a referral from a financial institution, and for a variety of reasons, sometimes it'll be staff initiated, but you're correct that the normal, almost all the time process would be that the financial institution would file a complaint.
So I don't understand, I'm just trying to understand. So they just write in and say, hey, we have a question about this, and then we initiate the complaint? Or
No, in this case, they actually submitted documentation and submitted correspondence. In this particular case, though, they didn't actually turn in a complaint form.
Thank you for the explanation. That's all I wanted to understand. So agenda item number 8E is available for vote now as well.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jeffries?
I move that we accept item E as presented by the board, or by the staff.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Jeffries, a second by Mr. Sostry. Any additional conversation? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. That will move us to agenda item number 9, modifications, which is a discussion and possible action regarding a request for modification of an agreed order in the matter of complaint number 15353.
Madam Chair and board members, agenda item 9 is a request for modification, more specifically a request for extension of time from Joshua Thomas Rock in regards to an agreed order that the board entered on February 9th of 2017. Mr. Rock, as part of the agreed order, was required to take some mentorship as well as a 15-hour USPAP course. He has completed the he's completed the mentorship, and he is seeking an extension to complete the USPAP course. In your materials, he has submitted his registration for the USPAP course to be held on August 16th and 17th, so just in a couple days. He is paid, and he seeks an extension to comply with the terms of his order until September 11th, and staff is not opposed to the extension.
Thank you, Kristen.
Not
Is there any
opposed.
questions of staff?
Okay.
I wanted to just speak briefly about the concept of the availability of these in-class courses, which apparently is the reason why he's asking for this extension. He states in his email that these are extremely difficult to come across, and I know that he had several months to find one. Is that a real issue?
The classes are available, and our staff goes through the calendar from various schools that offer the courses before we ask the respondents to sign an agreed order. Typically, what we see happen is that the respondents will wait until the 11th hour to take a class, and while one may be available, it may not be available in their hometown, and that's the position Mr. Rock found himself in. There was a course available, was it last weekend? It was available in San Antonio a couple weeks ago, and he could have traveled to San Antonio and completed that course without requesting an extension, but he wanted to wait until this course was available in Houston, which is where he resides.
So, Alex, we do see that repetitively. We've seen that repetitively lately, and I would echo that because I have to take those courses as a part of my ongoing certification, that finding them is not the problem. I think it's timing is one of the issues, and so to the degree that we can continue to communicate in a way that is abundantly clear to these folks that if we expect it to be inside the classroom, we expect it to be inside the classroom. My recollection is that the last meeting that we sat like this, we had someone else say, well, I wanted to take it online, and that's precisely what I think we're trying to avoid. There's a reason we have them in face-to-face mentorship, and we think they need to be in a USPAP class live. But they do offer them several times a year. That is one of the courses that you can get several times a year around the state of Texas. It is a matter of whether or not it's available in your hometown at a given time. So I don't think it's incredibly hard to get. It's not as if USPAP is offered twice a year in the state of Texas. It's just not offered every month in Dallas and Houston and San Antonio. They move those courses around the state.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Bolton?
I'd just like to ask, going forward and thinking about this, as the world gets more and more digital, and we're going to see less and less classroom, I'm fairly certain, or live classrooms, you know, what do we do to anticipate that? And Are there changes that we're going to need to contemplate in the future where there really, I think, is going to be a limitation on live classes?
I think that's probably, and I'm sorry, Kristen, I didn't realize that you were going to speak, but Chance, I want you guys to know that at least historically, that push for them to be live with people came from the board. So it came from enforcement, making some recommendations that we felt like they would learn better if they were actually with peers and maybe establishing some relationships that let them feel comfortable about picking up the phone and calling. So probably has to start with us to some degree. But then, Kristen, I apologize for walking over you.
No, Madam Chair. I was going to say the same thing, that the push for in-person classes originated with the board, so the board can at any time revisit that policy decision, and it would just be brought up through the Enforcement Committee process and then come to the board for a recommendation. But to further explain or expound upon the chair's comments, the board did recently change its agreed orders to allow for respondents to take mentorship via Skype and via teleconference to take advantage of the technology and recognize that our mentors are not available across the state. So we have done that.
You're seeing more and more TAR classroom interaction via video, that they have an opportunity for interaction, and that's what I think is one of the things that we felt like was important. I don't think it necessarily gets as close as achieving the handshake and the trading of the business card, but it's certainly better than just in the middle of the night clicking through an online course, which has value, right? But not everyone learns that way, and part of it is this whole attempt to create relationships that might help make us better as an industry.
I certainly understand that face-to-face is probably a better way to absorb material that you may be deficient in and need to learn about. My only point is that it gets harder and harder each year as I get recertified to find classes that you need when you need them, other than online, which is convenient because you don't have a time frame that you have to specifically adhere to. But the Institute does offer the synchronous courses, and that might be beneficial too. And I don't know that they offer USPAP at this time, but if they do expand to that, that might be something that we might incorporate into that. That would be make sure that people are complying with the orders in a timely manner.
So Jim, Buster, sounds like you got a new enforcement committee member candidate. We can continue to develop that thought process.
Well, and the only other comment that I would make is that this board doesn't have any education rules in terms of approving education courses, and that's something that you may want to revisit and look at if you want people to take these interactive online courses, because I know that the Real Estate Commission has worked really hard to develop those education rules to make sure that they are the types of education courses we would want our license holders to be taking and receiving credit for.
I can't recall, but in our last meeting, I think, like Jamie indicated, we had an instance of this similar type wanting an extension. Is there any attempt made before the agreed order is finalized to validate or to confirm that these classes are available in the time period that?
Yes, that's
Okay,
what
I thought y'all had mentioned that last time.
Well, and that's.
I mean, I certainly understand Chance's point, and I believe, time, as we move forward, that's obviously going to be where we go. But I thought you had mentioned that it was verified that there were actual classes that could be attended.
Yes, that's correct. The enforcement staff takes a look at all the education providers to see what courses are available and upcoming before they even offer that as a possible remedy in the agreed order.
Is in corresponding with the respondent, is that information made available to them to say, you're required to take these classes, here's a good opportunity to do so. It is,
Yes.
From my standpoint, Madam Chair, I can see here that it would appear that it's pretty clear from the agreed order itself, where it expressly states that these are in-class attendance, or require in-class attendance.
That's correct.
Yet his email says that he had to confirm this, and of course he confirmed it pretty late in the game. We can see that he has a sales receipt from just the other day registering where he found a class down the street from where he works.
Well, and understand all of that occurred after he requested the modification, because essentially what this board has said in the past is that if you're going to come in and request a modification, we want to see that you've taken some steps to actually show us that you are planning to register and take this class in the time extension that we will be granting you. In other words, show us some positive effort on your part as to why we should grant you this extension of time. So his getting registered for this class only occurred within the last week or so.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but if we don't grant this extension, it appears that the consequence would be, as best I can tell from the order, a fine of $1,000, and his license would be revoked until he does comply, which would be next week. So essentially it would be a monetary fine. He'd get his license back as soon as he finishes his course. Is that correct?
That is correct. His license would be suspended until he completes and provides evidence of compliance, i.e. the course completion certificate, to the board staff. So to the extent that he does that the day after he takes the course, yes, then he could get his license reinstated, and he would be subject to an additional $1,000 administrative penalty.
So I guess I can understand how it happens due to circumstances that folks tend to kind of push things off to the last minute. And I've done it. I think we've all done it, and that's understandable. And we've seen already a couple of instances since I've been a board member where, we've had folks come in and ask for extensions. And so, I mean, I don't want to be overly strident in the application of this, especially with somebody who is clearly seeking to comply and is trying to work with staff to set everything straight. I guess a final question is, I mean, is this something that we're just going to kind of see routinely, where folks just wait till the last minute and try to comply after the fact, expecting a deadline to be granted, an extension to be granted and that kind of thing?
Well, the board's rules do contain a procedure for modifying an agreed order for this express purpose. And we do see requests for modification, typically not at every board meeting, but I would say at least twice a year on average. We get at least one modification per meeting. And in Mr. Rock's case, he was also required to complete 11 hours of in-person mentorship or video conference mentorship on or before May 12th of 2017. And he has already completed that and provided us evidence of his compliance with that term of his agreed order. So it's just this course that he's lacking.
And previous boards have generally granted extensions, no big issues.
In the past, I haven't experienced the board denying an extension.
That's been my experience as well, but I understand the questions and where you're going. It's almost as if at some point there should be some penalty for failing to plan, especially when you're dealing with a disciplinary issue. So I don't think you'd find an absolute pushback if we started to try and turn the ship a bit. I suspect that it might be shocking if we completely were to deny the agreed order, but certainly those motions are available for the board to consider.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Jeffries?
With all due respect to all the conversation that we've heard, I think that being a practicing appraiser, it's difficult at times to make all your obligations, and you certainly have some onerous obligations to make it that not any less than fulfilling these agreed orders. But I think the request in this particular instance is reasonable. It's only for 30 days. He has signed up, and I'd like to move that we approve the extension.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Jeffries, a second by Mr. Black. Any additional conversation?
I have one question. Is there a fee for modification, any kind of
No,
modification?
there's no fee for requesting the modification.
Thank you.
Any additional conversation? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Let that be a message, though, to the general population. It seems as if at least the conversation is occurring, so we should not make presumptions that every agreed order and request for modification would be granted at no penalty. Agenda item number 10, discussion and possible action on proposal for decision of the State Office of Administrative Hearings in the matter of SOA docket 329-17934 ALC. Summer and Key.
Madam Chair and board members, this is a proposal for decision that comes to you from the State Office of Administrative Hearings. After notice, the ALJ held a hearing and recommends that respondent certification be revoked, and she should be assessed a $1,500 administrative penalty as requested by staff. And I'll let our enforcement staff answer any questions that you may have about the case.
We'll let Mark get up there.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mark Lee, I'm the staff attorney for the Appraiser Board. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about this case. It's a default because the respondent didn't show up for the hearing. And just as an explanation of the remedy we're asking for, it's a fourth time occurrence, and under our penalty matrix, this is the only option specified, is the revocation and the $1,500 fine.
So if that's what happens, revocation, and this individual doesn't pay the $1,500, then what happens?
Well, she wouldn't, to be honest, I haven't come across the issue before. I haven't been with the board that long, but I suspect that she might not be allowed to reinstate if she hasn't paid the penalty.
Can you generally give us an idea of what the allegations were that she failed to respond to?
There was some, I don't remember the specific allegations, but it was a complaint that had some issues in the appraisal report. She had 2 prior disciplines, then she had this one, she didn't respond, so the fourth complaint is for the not responding, because we can't resolve a complaint if we don't get a response. And I'll be frank, she had some personal issues, and we really tried to work with her in terms of giving her extensions, trying to get information, and it was only as a last resort. We offered maybe a surrender so she'd avoid the fine and have an easier time getting reinstated, and we just could not get a response from her at all.
So you had an initial response. We know that she was aware that she had a complaint.
Yes, ma'am.
And so now there's no dialogue going on at all.
Correct.
And once revoked, she could reapply?
Yes.
Theoretically in the future?
Yes, she can.
She would have to take the test and everything else?
I'd have to look at the rules. I don't remember specifically.
Let's just go ahead and, we know the rules. Commissioner, can you give us a briefing on what would be required?
She would have to, she could reapply anytime after 2 years after this, the date, the effective date of the order.
But this is a case of a person who's basically missing in action.
Correct.
She hasn't made any attempt to salvage her license or to respond to staff or anything.
We did have some email correspondence, but we never could get the responsive documents to the complaint, and she did not respond to the administrative proceedings.
No technical defense was ever raised, correct?
Other than she's got some health problems with her husband.
So why the fine of $1,500 then?
That's part of the statute. That's non-discretionary.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jeffries?
I think this issue's pretty cut and dried for us, and I make a recommendation. I make a motion that we accept the staff's recommendation and approve this action of the State Office of Administrative Hearings as presented.
So we're accepting the PFD.
Accept the proposal for decision, yes.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Jeffries, a second by Mr. Bolton. Any additional conversation? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? As best I can tell, we have no need for executive session. So we will move past agenda item number 11 and move to committee reports. Agenda item number 12 is the report by the AMC Advisory Committee, chaired by Mr. Jeffries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The AMC Advisory Committee met on July 25th of this year at 2 p.m. and the members in attendance by teleconference were myself and Angelica Guerrera and Sarah Oates. We had a full contingency of staff in attendance, which, of course, their assistance is also crucial for our operation of a committee. The members in public in attendance were Bill Owen with CoreLogic, Joe Waller with FACT, Tim Zach with CoreLogic, on behalf of REVAA, and I wish I knew what that meant, and Mark Schiffman with REVAA. The committee considered several items, including the staff reports and proposed amendments to Chapter 159, Texas Administrative Code, to align the TALC rules with legislative changes to Chapter 1104 Texas Occupations Code. The committee also considered allowing AMCs to designate more than one controlling person, which would then expand the pool of candidates who would be eligible to serve on the committee. And this was a pretty important issue for us since we're struggling to get some new committee members, and I hope there will be some in the very near future. We've already heard that maybe when the session is over, we'll have some action on that in that arena. The committee directed staff to prepare a rule amendment and form changes for consideration at a future date, and that is in regard to the having more than one controlling person designated. The committee also considered a request from REVAA to allow appraisers to perform appraisal reviews for an AMC without requiring geographic competency. And I think the issue there was that as long as the reviewer did not render an opinion of value, that we saw some merit in that discussion. Along with the proposed amendments to align the TALC rules with statutory changes to Chapter 1104, the committee proposed amendments to TALC Rules 159.154 and 159.155 in response to REVAA's request. The committee recommends the board publish all of the proposed amendments for public comment. One committee member asked about previous amendments to Rule 159.155 that were proposed but not adopted by the board in 2015. And if necessary and appropriate, the committee could consider the amendments and make any recommendations to the board as future business. We did not select a future meeting date, but would hold it in abeyance for approximately 30 days before our next regular scheduled board meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. We appreciate the work of your committee. It's always an honor to have such great minds working together. Our next committee report is the Budget Committee, chaired by Mr. Black.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to just real quickly say thank you to the commissioner and staff for doing just a fantastic job, in our opinion. Myself and Joyce and Tony all agree that y'all have done a magnificent job, explained it very well, and I'm very pleased with what we see on the budget here, so big thank you. Having said that, since the May board meeting, we've had 2 meetings. The first one we had was via teleconference on July 6, 2017. Those in attendance were myself, Clayton Black, Joyce Yanuzzi, and Tony Pena, and then of course the Commissioner Douglas Oldmixon, who pretty well explained everything very thoroughly. I would say probably the only change that we really saw that I could see, which was fantastic, it was great here, actual expenses were a little more accurately established with real data as opposed to projected data that we had seen back in May. So I thought that was very nice. We met again this morning, August 14th, 2017, upstairs at 8:30 a.m. And those in attendance were myself, Clayton Black, Joyce Yanuzzi, Tony Pena, Commissioner Oldmixon, and staff members present were Aretha Trice, Melissa Huerta, and Priscilla Pifo. So it went very well, not a whole lot of changes at all, and I would say thank you once again to the Commissioner. If there's some questions, probably that would be best directed to the Commissioner and agenda item number 21 when he will have a more thorough report. But I'm very pleased with everything, and a big thank you. I think it's a lot of heavy lifting they did on their part, and it makes sense to me.
Thank you, Mr. Black, and I would echo that. You know, one of the real advantages is to having a highly qualified staff putting this budget together over the course of my term of service, the confidence level that we can have in the fact that the numbers are somewhere close to right, even in times when we were truly had nothing to go on, right? I have been incredibly impressed and appreciative of the expertise that we have at a staff level that makes our job much easier. Also the process, because having us have more than one look at the budget is incredibly helpful to making today's decisions much easier and more efficient. And so thanks to the committee for their work. Thank you to staff and especially the Commissioner and his ability to lead at that level, and our crew that works on the accounting side of things that are so critically important. Next report is the Enforcement Committee chaired by Mr. Renfro. And Mr. Renfro, I realize that Mr. Bolton serves with you, but you know, Mr. Jeffries, myself, and you have had the great honor of chairing enforcement, and that was my encouragement, is maybe we needed to continue to increase his responsibilities along the way as he expresses interest and desire that direction.
I'm honored, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you pointed out, yes, Mr. Bolton is a member of the Enforcement Committee, and our other member is Alex Sostre. We have not actually met since the previous board meeting of May 5th, 2017, but we have been in receipt of survey results regarding the issue of supervisory appraisers and trainees. You may recall, but the last meeting we actually had on March 9, 2017, the committee tabled the discussion on this topic about allowing supervisory appraisers to supervise more than 3 trainees. And we directed staff at that time to gather additional information from license holders regarding this topic. Staff did do a survey, and that survey has, the results have been in, and license holders have responded, and we will get an update and more details on this survey results. I believe that's agenda item number 22. At this time, though, after we received those results, the committee decided that we would like to seek additional input from the entire board regarding this topic. So we'll have to wait and hear that survey results in agenda item number 22, and at this time, we do not have a future meeting set.
Thank you, Mr. Renfro. Also appreciate your committee work, and it's nice to know that at least on that side of the table, it got a little lighter because that committee was carrying a heavy load for many years in a row. So thanks for getting us caught up. Takes us to agenda item number 15, staff reports.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. Welcome to the last meeting for this fiscal year. Just adding to the record, REVAA, often referred to as REVA, stands for the Real Estate Valuation Advocacy Association, which is a group of appraisal management companies. It is their trade organization. So, and we have a good working relationship with them, as well as we do with many of the appraiser professional associations. Just a reminder, of course, maybe too late for some, but we are live streaming this meeting, as we do all, and the microphones are sensitive, so please turn them on when you want to be heard, and turn them off at all other times. I wanted to report a couple of things. Last week, the Real Estate Center at Texas A&M reported that Texas leads the nation in job creation. And that is a repeat statistic. But given that fact, and as all of us should be well aware, the number of people relocating to Texas, moving to Texas, seeking opportunities here, both employers and, of course, then the employees, home development, the retail that comes behind that, and all of the other service industries. The Texas economy is doing quite well, and we see that reflected in our license holder numbers. There's not a significant increase on the real estate appraiser side for a variety of reasons, but on the real estate license holder for brokers and sales agents, those numbers continue to climb steadily and climb significantly. That helps our overall agency budget. Of course, we just came off of a legislative session, which we have talked about, and President Greg Stevens, representing FACT, gave us an update on one of the bills. We had 5 total bills that affected the agency directly. Of course, that one affected the board most directly. But we will spend most of this fall traveling around the state, meeting with groups of stakeholders to explain the changes that are here and some that are coming in January on the basis of those law changes. And of course, some of the rules that are required to be changed are on your agenda here today. One of the things that I was asked to ensure that you were aware of is that that there is a new form proposed, a new addendum proposed by the Broker Lawyer Committee on the commission side, but it has direct impact on residential transactions in Texas, where the appraised value becomes a decisive factor for either the buyer or the seller. And so there's a new form proposed, and I would ask you to look at the materials. Of course, they'll also be on the register, but look at the materials from the prior meeting of the commission, and you'll see that form. But basically, it deals with an issue that has become a significant issue in a seller's market, and that is where the property appraisal may not be precisely in line with the expectations of the parties. So what happens then? Does the deal need to be entirely renegotiated each and every time? And so the Broker Lawyer Committee considered a variety of inputs, comments from lots of different stakeholders, and came up with a proposed addendum to a contract that gives a couple of options. To trade off equity for debt is one possibility. If you had a $100,000 purchase price and you were anticipating putting down $20,000 in equity and borrowing $80,000, but it turns out the property is, doesn't appraise for $100,000, and so the lender won't lend you $80,000. So you just say, well, I'll put up a little more equity and accept the loan. That's one possibility. Or to terminate if the property does not reach a prescribed or an indicated appraised value. So it'll give the opportunity for the person making the offer to simply put that limit in there and say, this offer is contingent upon the property appraising for that value. So just to let you know, because this is the appraiser board, and that's affects a lot of our license holders. And so that will become perhaps a little more predictable than it has been in the past if that form is adopted. If you have any comments that you want to make about that form, please, we encourage you to do that during the comment period. And that will be essentially over the month of September, let's call it, and then it'll be considered. Actually, I think it ends before the end of September, and then it'll be reconsidered by the Broker Lawyer Committee, and those recommendations brought for action to the Commission at their next meeting on November the 13th. We've already gone through all of the reports of committees and all of the disciplinary stuff. I wanted to also let you know that the Commission or the agency really received an award, an international communication award from Arello for our website. And as you guys know, the TREC website is modeled after the TALCB website, and so we'll just call that a shared award, okay? Because if we hadn't prototyped it, it wouldn't have happened. So. Also wanted to let you know that we, and this was back in May, immediately shortly after our May meeting, we had a recognition of all of the employees, the staff of the agency, on Public Service Recognition Day. And because you are public servants as well, at your place you will find a dually branded water bottle that has both the logo of the Commission and the board on it that was given to each of the staff members, and now also one to you for your personal use. We thank you, as always, for this volunteer service that you do on behalf of the citizens of Texas. I wanted to just make a few brief remarks about agenda items. We'll just to call your attention to 21. Of course, that's the budget, which we'll talk about. Just some conclusory remarks and then answer your questions. 24 is our General Counsel, Kristen Warman, will give you an update on all the federal rules that are pending and other matters like that. It seems like every meeting we have developments in that arena, some 2 steps forward, some 3 steps back. But you'll get the latest position on the board, or excuse me, the position of federal rules that are proposed. Under 25, we'll talk about the sunset review process, which we will be undergoing during the 2019 session and and all of the time leading up to the 2019 session. This agency will be under a sunset review process, and the very first step in that is the self-evaluation report. We'll talk about that a little bit. And lastly, Priscilla Pifo will tell us a little bit about the internal audit, which is in your agenda under item number 26. So we've been busy. We continue to be busy. We are extraordinarily grateful that we have the resources to do what needs to be done to keep this board and this agency at the forefront of effectiveness, we believe, in Texas state government. So if there are no questions, I will turn it over to the staff, but I'm happy to entertain any questions that you have. All right, thank you.
Good morning. Amy Jasper, Communication Coordinator for the Reception and Communication Services Division. Please refer to the C1 report. For the month of June 2017, the agency received 27,656 calls, assisted 276 walk-ins, and responded to 12,280 emails. Of these, TALCB received 1,725 calls, had 11 walk-ins, and responded to 610 emails. The next report is the C2 report. For the month of June 2017, the agency received 49 surveys. 21 surveys were submitted with comments and contact information. Of the 21 surveys, 6 were submitted by appraisers. The top 3 comment categories involved customer service, the TREC website, and the hold time. The remaining 28 surveys were submitted anonymously with and without comments. All 21 surveys submitted with contact information have been resolved. The next report is the C3 report. The numbers for the third quarter are for March through May of 2017. The average length of time it took to complete a call was 13 minutes, 15 seconds, and the average hold time was 12 minutes. The total number of calls received is an average of approximately 20,000 per month. We are currently working on a couple of projects to help improve our customer service with phone and email volume, as well as the hold time. A few of our RCS staff members will be able to telecommute within the next couple of months. The workstations will be vacant, which will provide us the opportunity to hire additional staff. Adding staff to our division will help decrease the hold times, which should in turn reduce the email volume. This concludes my report. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
Sorry about that. Just
That's
a couple of quick ones. I did note that the hold time is up, and certainly we're hearing that on the street a bit. I suspect it's in part with the TREC website changes. Certainly learning curve exists, and I'm happy to hear that we're working towards resolution on that. On the appraisal side, it looks like on a percentage basis, in terms of the number of complaints received, we're a bit higher than TREC if you look at the number of calls we receive. And I'm just curious, I have not called in recently on a main line. Is there a message to the caller that says, that gives them an opportunity to go to the website and potentially get questions or leave word for someone to call them back?
Yes, ma'am, there is, and there's also information that they can send an email to information and ask for assistance that way if they don't want to hold on the line.
And so they're still holding in spite of the fact that they have that opportunity?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
So how many people are actually manning the phones?
Right now, we have 11 staff members manning the phones.
Okay. How many more planning on implementing?
Right now, we're looking at 3.
11 sounds reasonable to me, and it's still 12 minutes. That's interesting.
Right.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Thank you. You guys do handle a huge call volume, so thanks for the job that you're doing and the fact that you're trying to solve the problem. We'll continue to work towards a solution. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. My name is Denise Sample. I'm the licensing manager in Education and Licensing Services. And before I begin my report, I would like to introduce a new staff member who joined Education and Licensing Services. Patty Bell was hired as a license permit specialist. She started with us on May 17th. She's currently processing our sales applications, but will be trained to review and evaluate our more complex appraiser applications as she gains experience. She came to us with over 12 years of experience working with the Texas Osteopathic Medical Association as an executive assistant. She enjoys spending time with family and friends. She loves the outdoors. She enjoys kayaking, reading, and traveling. She appreciates art history and loves museums, and anyone who meets Patty is always welcomed with a smile. So, help me in welcoming Patty to the agency. So the first report before you for the Education and Licensing Services Division provides a number of active certifications and licenses. At the end of June, there was an overall total of 6,070 active appraisers, which is an increase of 23 over that of June of 2016. Comparing the most recent totals to June of 2016, we see an increase of 43 in the number of active appraiser trainees, and those are individuals that are entering the appraiser field. The last line item reflects the total number of out-of-state temporary registrations and the total number of inactive appraisers. The next report is for Appraisal Management Company, or AMC registrations. We issued 2 new AMC registrations in the month of June. Since the AMC program began, 21 companies have surrendered their registration, 3 were revoked, and 45 registrations have been expired for more than 6 months. Our total number of AMC registrations at the end of June is 166. The next report is the L1 report, which provides a June fiscal year comparison of applications received, licenses issued from original applications, and licenses issued from renewal applications. Our fiscal year comparisons show an overall increase of approximately 10% of the number of original applications received, particularly in the category of licensed residential appraisers had the largest increase. We also see increases in the total number of licenses issued from timely and late renewal applications as compared to this time last year. The next report is the exam activity report. A total number of 162 examinations have been administered. Exam pass rates for licensed residential appraiser applicants is approximately 54%. For certified residential applicants, 62%. Certified general applicants is 72%, and the overall pass rate is 61%. The bottom portion of this report provides examination activity results for the month of June. The last report is a year-to-date comparison of examination activity for the month of June. We see increases in the pass rates for each appraiser license type, resulting in an increase in the overall pass rate. And unless there are any questions, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Madam Chair, good morning.
Good morning.
Members. My name is Steve Spiropoulos. I'm the IT Division Director at the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board, also at TREC. Before I begin my presentation of the I-1 and I-2 reports, I would like to announce that we have completed the new hire of our new web administrator. His name is Damon Chrisman. Damon came to us with 20 years of experience, including having contributed in building the City of Austin website and having worked on multiple projects at Baylor University. He holds an IS degree from Tarleton State University. Please join me in welcoming Damon to the team. Thank you. Now I'd like to direct your attention to the I-1 report for the month of June 2017. We see an increase in total monthly unique visitors to our website to 300,915 for the current fiscal year-to-date total. That's an increase compared to the prior fiscal year-to-date total. When we look at our online transaction utilization, we see increases in the percentages of applications and renewals for the current fiscal year-to-date, from 45.8% to 54%, and from 91.3% to 91.7% for renewals. The AMC panel transactions remain fully available and utilized online at 100%. The I-2 report represents the data from the I-1 report over a period of 1 year. And as you can see from the graph on the application services, we continue to see increases for online utilization. The latest month of June for the report is at 71.1% for renewals, or sorry, for applications, 93.5% for renewals. And the relationship management tool stays at 100% for the whole period. Do you have any questions? Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Priscilla Pifo, Director of Staff and Support Services. Today is the, excuse me. I'd like to call your attention to the budget status report, which is the first report up. This report shows revenues and expenditures through the end of June. You'll notice that our target for expenditures at this juncture is 16.7% that would be remaining, and that we're well within that boundary at 23.6%. Revenues are also ahead of where we would expect to be. You can see that we have 5.8% remaining to be collected. Excuse me. So overall, we are in good shape. Moving on to our investments report. As you will recall, our laddered approach to investments is quarterly maturity dates, and in this report you'll notice that during this time we had one of our investments mature, which was reinvested, bringing our ending market value to $796,509.73. If there are no questions, at this time I would like to acknowledge one of our staff members. Y'all have gotten introduced to people who are joining us. I would like to acknowledge a longtime staff member, Barbara Kolb, who has been with the agency for 23 years. She has done an outstanding job, as most recently in the last 8 years of being our chief accountant. She has served under 4 executive directors and 4 directors of staff and support services. So Barbara will be greatly missed. She is retiring at the end of September after she's had a chance to help us with the annual financial report. So I'd like to thank her for her years of service.
Thank you.
If there are no questions at this time, I will yield the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, board members, Madam Chair. Troy Bollier, Director of Standards and Enforcement Services. Before I give you my regular report, I did want to bring two items to your attention. First, I wanted to make you aware that next week we're going to be having several investigative conferences where we'll actually be meeting in person with individuals who have either complaint matters or experience audits pending. And if you've ever been interested in understanding and observing how that process works, that might be an opportunity. We send out regular emails making people aware of when those are available, so you'll get those. But if you are interested in attending, please respond and we'll coordinate with you so you can observe one. The second item that I wanted to mention briefly was some changes and improvements we've had to the disciplinary actions page on the board's website. As you may recall, at the last board meeting, Mr. Bear attended and expressed some concerns about wording on the website. And this update took into account his concerns to better reflect his specific situation. We've made a variety of improvements to the language in different sections, such as the basis for order section, the sanctions section, the license type section, to improve the readability and the effectiveness of the website for consumers and other individuals who use that. I wanted to particularly thank our ITS division. Steve and his team do a great job, and in particular, Britta Mutchler and Jason Romero were really instrumental in helping us get these changes completed. Bringing your attention to the E1 report, you've got before you information regarding the status of Appraiser case matters. And you can see on the bottom left-hand corner that as of the end of the month of June, we have 223 matters pending. You can see on the top portion of this page on the right-hand side that we've had 148 complaints come in this fiscal year so far, and a total of 265 matters. And then you can see on the bottom half those matters that have been closed and resolved, a total of 243 total matters there in the bottom right, and a total of 128 complaints resolved. The next E1 report is specific to appraisal management companies. And you can see here, this is again through the end of June. The bottom left-hand corner, you can see we have 11 pending appraisal management company matters. And you can see at the top the number of incoming complaints, a very modest 7 so far this year. And again, as far as closed complaints, 7. So not a lot of movement there. The next slide reflects total open complaints. And I would like to point out a couple of key things. First, as you may recall, we have several matters that while they appear to be quite old, 2009, 2014, and 15, you'll recall that those are all requests for assistance matters that the agency doesn't have direct control over because it's at the request of a law enforcement agency that we open the matter and are assisting them. While the 2009 matter does remain open, and of course we regularly stay in contact with those agencies so we can timely and promptly close them when appropriate, I did want to point out to you that both in 2014 you can see that one assistance request was recently closed, and so next quarter when you see this chart there will no longer be an entry for 2014. And then more important, if you see there in 2015, 7 of the 8 matters were recently resolved when we spoke with law enforcement, and they've resolved their issues so we could close the case. So some of those older ones that we don't have complete control over are getting closed. I wanted to point your attention also to the total over 1-year-old cases, and you can see there 26 were pending as of the end of March, and then as of the end of June, 35 were pending. And what I did want to point to you is that we are moving in a positive direction in that regard. Since June 30th, obviously, there have been additional matters resolved, including the 7 that were on the agenda today. So we're actually lower than we were at the end of March. The next slide I wanted to bring your attention to reflects complaint resolutions. Current through June 30th for this fiscal year. And you can see, of course, the pie chart on the left, we have 133 total complaints resolved. The vast majority of those, about 70%, are dismissals. And you can see the breakdown of that on the right-hand side there. I would point out a little bit of an uptick that's unusual in the NOAV/default final order category. We had a bump of a number of those this past quarter. Normally it's much lower. That was largely due to one case involving unlicensed activity that had a number of complaints. Just to give you a flavor for what we mean by NOAV or default final order, that would be just like Ms. Key's matter that you addressed earlier today at the SOA PFD. The next slide concerns total number of complaints received, and here what you'll see is this is a graphical representation with the data underneath based on license type. And you can see that for 2017 things are trending down compared to the previous couple of years. And then finally, the last slide I wanted to bring your attention reflects staff-initiated complaints that are based upon experience audits. And on the left-hand side, you have a bar chart reflecting the last 8 fiscal years. So if you look to the far right, you'll see for FY 2017, so far, we have 5 supervisory appraisers who've had complaints. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a pie chart there, and that is reflective of all those 8 years of history and what the breakdown is of that total 53 complaints. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
Troy, go ahead.
I've got a quick question, just out of curiosity. You mentioned that the change in the language in the website, specifically for the case of Mr. Bear. I'm just curious to see what the resolution of that was. What specific language is being used in his situation?
We changed the language on the website to reflect that it was alleged violations of USPAP because of the unique nature of the resolution that we reached with him in that case.
Thank you.
And Troy, in that same vein, did we communicate those changes to Mr. Bear?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
Thank you. And I've got a couple of other questions. Unless other board members have questions, I'll be happy to hold mine. Martha Gale?
I just have a question on the, it looks like the bulk of the complaints from staff are regarding supervisory appraisers.
Yes, ma'am.
So is that during the, explain that to me.
Yes, ma'am.
Better.
So during the experience audit process, under federal requirements, we're required to look at least 2 samples of an appraiser trainee's work product for general compliance with the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice. And as part of that, we are required to actually obtain the work file and the appraisal report. And during the course of that, it may come to our attention that there are serious deficiencies in the supervisory appraiser's role in ensuring the trainees adequately, diligently supervised and trained. And so that would be the basis for a complaint against the supervisory appraiser.
So it appears that this is a large category, a large issue.
It actually doesn't come up too often. I think that if you look at, basically we've had a total on the right-hand side there, the pie chart, we've had 53 total complaints over that 8-year period. So it's not really a huge portion. I mean, if you look at the slide with complaint resolutions from FY 2017, you'll see underneath the pie chart that roughly about 0.5% of our license holders actually are the only ones that have discipline. So we're dealing with very, very small numbers in terms of the overall licensee population. I don't have the figures in front of me, but I think if you'll recall at the last meeting when we shared you some information after working with our partners in FACT, it's something like 90% of all the experience audits are approved. So we really are talking about a small segment of the overall population that have issues.
Well, when these do occur, what do you typically find is the complaint? I mean, what area? Ethics?
For us to staff-initiate a complaint, it needs to be more serious. So yes, I would say sometimes ethics, sometimes deliberate misrepresentations, sometimes serious deficiencies like gross negligence, where someone is either consciously or recklessly disregarding their obligations.
So it's not a minor issue of
No, ma'am.
a USPAP, which is a minor
It would have to
violation.
be serious USPAP
A
deficiencies
serious,
for us to move forward.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Troy, question as it pertains to the same topic, because this issue has come up several times in past meetings, and having read the survey results, it seemed to be an issue that some of the respondents had regarding why they don't take on more trainees. Have we ever collected or put together statistics that would cover the number of audits or evaluations that were ongoing and the number of disciplines that were a result of that? In other words, did we have 100 last year and only 2? I mean, it would give us, I think, at least some statistics that we could define a little bit better.
And you may recall, after discussions with FACT, that's exactly what we did, is we generated those statistics. I believe we did through the end of February 2017 and the prior 2 fiscal years, so FY 15 and 16. And I believe some of that information is also on our website, but we presented it, I believe, here at the May meeting. But it is something that on a go-forward basis we're going to be tracking. I've already worked with my staff to make that something we're going to regularly keep an eye on. And what we're doing on the outreach front, you may have received an email about this, but we're going to be offering a 2-hour enforcement update course for 2 hours worth of ACE credit. And a portion of that program we're planning on bringing up these types of statistics and information so people get a better sense of what the data shows.
I just think that'd be very helpful information so that we could directly answer any of those kind of questions that we get. It does come up. Sometimes I do get questioned about it, and when I'm out in the public at different appraiser meetings and training classes, this topic does seem to come up quite frequently. And I know that the last time we addressed this, and in response to Fact's question, the numbers seem to disprove this common thought that this was an issue. And like I said, the results from that survey, it seemed to come up quite often that there was risk involved in taking a trainee, this particular issue being the risk. Thanks. Appreciate your comments.
I just want to point out that it's very important for us to increase the number of licenses and the appraisers in our state because it's a dwindling number, and we certainly want to encourage the industry. Thank you.
Troy, I've got a couple of quick questions. Can you give me a gauge for the length of time from application to issuance on experience audits? How long is it taking these days?
We have an internal goal of trying to complete them within 30 to 60 days, and the outward 90 days when they're more complex or commercial. And I believe when we looked at those figures as part of the dialogue with Fact that we were operating within those parameters. So I would say it's probably running, on the lighter end, 30 to 60 days when it's a simple residential matter. On a more complex commercial thing, probably 60 to 90 days.
Thank you. That's really a public service announcement. I've been being asked that question out in the public, and so that gives people a gauge that are trying to actively pursue the career. And because we have a relatively newly seated board and lots of the chairs here, on the complaint matrix that we're looking at, what is other? So the TALCB and AMC report have various complaint categories. What makes up the other category?
It's basically going to be a hodgepodge of rule or statutory violations that don't easily fall into the listed categories.
All of the above? So,
right.
Okay. Anything else? Gotcha. It's just a big number on some of these reports, and so just calling it to their attention that if it's a Dodd-Frank violation or an ethics violation, you'll see it separated out, but if it doesn't hit those radars, then it ends up in the other category. Can you give me one example of what another would be?
Oh, for example, if there was a failure to respond to a complaint.
Thank you. Those are my questions. What other questions does the board have of enforcement? Or Mr. Bouillon? Thanks, Troy.
Thank you.
Now to the exciting part of the meeting, the rules for possible adoption.
It's so exciting, Madam Chair and board members. We only have one rule for possible adoption this meeting. We have lots for proposal, though. Up for adoption in agenda item 16 is Board Rule 153.16, license reinstatement. The amendments to this rule clarify the requirements for applicants who apply for license reinstatement and explain when an applicant for license reinstatement is eligible for an examination waiver. No comments were received on the amendments as proposed, and staff recommends adopting the amendments as published.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Pena.
I move that the staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit for adoption amendments to 153.16 license reinstatement without changes to text as published in the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Pena, a second by Ms. Lynch. Any additional conversation?
It was actually by me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for, that's why I do that, so that if I think I hear the voice from the wrong place, I'm able to correct it. So Ms. Yanuzzi, we'll get credit for the second on the minutes, please. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Agenda item number 17 through 19 are the discussion and possible action to propose amendments for 22 TAC, Chapter 157, Rules Relating to Practice and Procedure.
Madam Chair and board members, before you in Agenda Item 17A are amendments to 157.7, Denial of a License, Adverse Action Against a License Holder. Before you in Item 18 is amendments to 157.9, Notice of Hearing, and 157.12, Failure to Attend Hearing Default. Before you in Agenda Item 19 are amendments to 157.15, Decision, and 157.17, Final Decisions and Orders. The proposed amendments to these rules align the rules in Chapter 157 with statutory changes adopted by the 85th Legislature and make conforming changes for consistency. The Executive Committee has reviewed the proposed amendments and recommends the Board publish the proposed amendments for public comment. Staff also recommends that the amendments be published as presented.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jeffries.
I move that the staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 157.7, 157.9, 157.12, 157.15, and 157.17 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for proposal.
Madam Chair, I second.
Motion by Mr. Jeffries, second by Mr. Bolton. Any additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Takes us to agenda item number 20, discussion and possible action to propose new rules and amendments to 22 TAC, Chapter 159, rules relating to the provisions of the Texas Appraisal Management Company Registration and Regulation Act.
Madam Chair and board members, before you in this agenda item are proposed amendments to Rules 159.1, Definitions, 159.4, Appraisal Management Company Advisory Committee, 159.52, Fees, 159.102, Eligibility for Registration, Ownership, 159.104, Primary Contact, Appraiser Contact, 159.105, Denial of Registration, 159.154, Competency of Appraisers, 159.155, Periodic Review of Appraisers, 159.156, Business Records, 159.201, Guidelines for Revocation, Suspension, or Denial of a License, 159.205, Identity Theft. The proposed amendments to these rules align the rules with statutory changes adopted by the 85th Legislature. They change a caption to eliminate duplicity and confusion. They clarify the meaning of the term assignment in Section 1104.154 of the AMC Act and the type of appraiser credential required to be qualified to perform an appraisal review within the meaning of Section 1104.153 of the AMC Act, and the amendments make conforming changes for consistency. The AMC Advisory Committee reviewed the proposed new rule and amendments and recommends the board publish the new rule and amendments for public comment. And just to be clear, the proposed new rule is 159.205, identity theft. Staff also recommends proposing and publishing the rule, the amendments and the new rule as presented for public comment.
Thank you, Kristen. I have one question about the identity theft portion of the rule. It says that the license holder must notify the board if the license holder is a victim of identity theft. I suspicion that we're going to need to educate folks about that. That's an understandable need in the rule, but not sure I've heard anything out in the industry about that.
It's not a common occurrence. We have a corresponding rule in Chapter 153 for individual appraisers, and this rule would apply to AMCs in the case that their license number is being utilized in an unauthorized manner. And this is the process that they would follow to notify the board that that license number is being used in an unauthorized manner and the steps that they can take to get a different license number.
It seems like it's broader than that, right? Unlawfully obtaining, possessing, transferring, or using a person's electronic or handwritten signature. I mean, the intent, I guess, of the identity theft rule is exclusively as it relates to their activity as an appraiser and/or AMC?
Yes, this is as it relates to the AMC's license.
And I understand that, and I apologize for confusing the two. I would assume that the language is similar on the appraisal side.
Yes, it is. It's the same.
All right. Other
It's
questions?
more of a proactive approach, I guess, to this. I mean, they're not seeing a whole lot of identity theft, but
No, we don't. We have seen it on the appraiser side. We have seen appraisers take, for example, their supervisory appraiser's license and utilize that to write appraisers when they don't have a license themselves. And we have an identity theft rule in Chapter 153, and this rule is being proposed for consistency with the appraisers.
Can I ask a question? What happens next? And I realize that's not in the rule itself, but is there a burden upon the licensee to substantiate the fraud or the identity theft?
No, and understand that we don't actually address the fraud and identity theft through this rule. That would be addressed through the complaint process. This is simply a process for the AMC to notify us that their license or their signature is being used without their permission, and for us to give them a new license number and a new license that they can operate under while they clear up everything under the prior license number.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Black?
I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 159.1, 159.4, 159.52, 159.102, 159.104, 159.105, 159.154, 159.155, 159.156, 159.201, and 159.205 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical and or non-substantive changes as required for proposal.
A second.
Thank you, Mr. Black, for taking the heavy lifting there, and thanks, Ms. Lynch, for
It's a
the
mouthful.
second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Move to pending business, discussion and possible action regarding the approval of the TALCB 2018 budget and budget-related policies.
Madam Chair and members, you have before you on the dais the proposed budget for fiscal year 2018. As you recall at our May meeting, I think this item took about 10 or 15 minutes because I explained in excruciating detail what goes into compiling the budget for each of those items. We provided a copy to you on July the 20th of this very same budget, and it is identical. Okay, and so there's been lots of opportunity for review. When it was sent out, I asked if anyone had any questions, certainly to reach back to me, or concerns about process, either to me or to the Budget Committee Chair. And we received no inquiries or areas of concern. I wanted to reassure you a couple things, as you might just notice if you look at the total expenditure line under budget variance. So the difference between last year's budget and this year's budget, or proposed, the current year that we're in, and proposed next year, is $14,083. So it's a very, very modest increase in total expenditures that you are authorizing. The greatest area of change that you may note is in the very first item, salary and wages. It includes 5% total increase in the salary budget from FY17 to FY18. That will allow me on behalf of the board to implement a $200 per month or $2,400 per year per person cost of living adjustment that has been approved also on the commission side, and we talked about at our May meeting, which is really based on our comparison of salaries in the agency to the marketplace, a needed adjustment that will bring the board. The board is fairly competitive with that one exception. We have not lost staff to issues based on compensation. Okay, so this adjustment will keep us competitive. That's the expense side. On the revenue side, of course, you note that for license fees, we show them down slightly because of the difference between odd and even numbered years, and that difference is remarkable, especially in the AMC category, which requires us to then have an adjustment in the second line up from the bottom of the page, carrying forward a portion of the renewal fees for AMCs into the next year to normalize revenues across a two-year biennium. With that, we have a budget that is slightly in the black, a little over $1,000 anticipated. If you will turn to the second, and I'm happy to answer any questions about expenses or revenues, but I would like to point out something on the second page, and that is in the area, this is the policy-related stuff, in the area of reserves. So the board, per its policies, maintains 3 reserves. The first one being reserve for current operations and contingencies. That by policy must be somewhere between 3 and 4 months of total expenses. This budget proposes a 3.9 month reserve for operations. Reserve for educational development, we have accumulated prior years amounts in there, and we anticipate adding at the end of this fiscal year another $38,000, bringing that to about $150,000. The reserve for long-term facility master plan has currently $740,000 set aside, and we are proposing to add an additional $280,000 to that reserve. So a motion to approve this budget would also approve that dedication to reserve. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Are there any questions of the commissioner?
If you need a motion, I'd form one.
Jump right in.
Madam Chair, I move that the board approves this budget as presented by staff.
Motion by Mr. Black,
I second.
second by a bunch of people. We'll give Mr. Jeffries the credit. Motion by Mr. Black, second by Mr. Jeffries. Any additional questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Discussion and possible action regarding the number of trainees a supervisory appraiser may supervise is agenda item number 22.
Madam Chair and board members, just a little bit of context on this agenda item. You may recall at the board's request, the Enforcement Committee has been considering whether to raise the number of appraiser trainees that a supervisory appraiser may supervise at any one time. And as Mr. Renfro mentioned in the Enforcement Committee report, the committee has been considering this, and based on the survey results, would like additional input from the full board before moving forward on this issue. The board members may recall that we are limited currently to 3 trainees per supervisory appraiser based on the real property appraiser qualification criteria adopted by the Appraiser Qualification Board. There is an exception within the criteria that allows the board to raise the number of trainees, but to do so, we have to provide a program for progress monitoring. We have to implement additional supervisory appraiser qualifications and supervision and oversight requirements for supervisory appraisers. You may also recall that the board recently adopted a voluntary review process rule for trainees to submit their work product to the board for review and analysis on compliance with USPAP. That process qualifies as the progress monitoring process that would be required to raise the number of trainees. The ASC has already reviewed and vetted that rule and has given their blessing on that process. Historically, the board has not chosen to raise the number of trainees, and the survey that the Enforcement Committee asked us to conduct can give you some indication as to why. Those results appear on page 168 of the materials. We had about 665 appraisers respond to the survey. 26.5%, or 176 out of the 665, said that they do supervise appraisers. 20 out of 170 who responded to question 2, or 11, just under 12%, said that they supervised 3 trainees, or the maximum number currently allowed. 49 out of 175 appraisers, or 28%, said that they would want to supervise more than 3 trainees if allowed to do so. Out of this 49, 29, or a little over 59%, said they would supervise up to 5 trainees. 9 out of the 49, or 18.4%, would supervise between 6 and 10 trainees. 5 out of the 49, or 10.2%, said they would supervise up to 4 trainees, and 3 out of the 49, or 6%, said they would supervise more than 10 trainees. So if all 49 respondents who said they wanted to supervise more than 3 trainees supervised just 1 more trainee, and 29 supervised 2 more trainees, that would be almost 80 new trainees that we could add to the license holder base. So the Enforcement Committee requests additional input that would answer the question of how many trainees to allow supervisory appraisers to supervise. The following questions that the committee would like the input from the board on are: what is the maximum number of trainees that a supervisory appraiser should be allowed to supervise, and what qualifications should a supervisory appraiser have before being allowed to exceed the current maximum of 3 appraiser trainees? This would require a simple rule amendment to authorize supervisory appraisers to supervise more than 3 trainees.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Jeffries?
I have read this, and of course, I just heard what you said too, Kristen. Has the appraisal subcommittee approved all 3 of the criteria that would allow us to increase from 3 to 5? The progress monitoring, supervisory certified appraisal qualifications, and oversight requirements for supervisory appraisers.
No, they have not. They've only given us blessing on the voluntary review program to use that as the progress monitoring criteria. So they've given blessing of the first criteria. We would have to craft additional appraiser qualifications and supervision and oversight requirements for supervisory appraisers. That would be as simple as perhaps requiring an additional number of years of certification before allowing a supervisory appraiser to exceed the 3 trainee maximum that is the current threshold. For example, Washington is the only other state that allows appraisers to go above the 3-person or 3 trainee maximum, and they require that you have 5 years of certification before you can go above that maximum. And they allow, depending on the experience of the trainee and the supervisory appraiser, up to 8 trainees per supervisory appraiser.
Thank you.
Kristen, I want to be sure that I heard you correctly. How many other states allow more than 3?
Just 1, Washington.
Okay. And along with experience criteria, do they have any, are we aware whether they have any requirements as it relates to the supervisor and previous disciplinary history?
I'm not aware of any requirements regarding disciplinary history. There are none specified in their rule.
Madam Chair, I have a question, please.
Yes, Mr.
Do
Pena?
you know how long the 3 trainee maximum has been in place?
Long time.
It's been in place for quite a long time. I don't have a precise date for
Maybe
you.
one of the appraisers on the board might know.
More than 10 years is my recollection. I think it's always been that, and it's never been adjusted to my knowledge.
I think it was right around 2003. That's my estimate. Is that right?
2006 is what my recollection.
Okay, there we go. More than a decade.
11 years.
More than my 10.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a comment.
Sure, Mr. Bolton?
When we've gone through the process of talking about this, some of the things that I took away from it, excuse me, one, this is an opportunity, if we were to expand it, the number of trainees, per supervisor to expand the base. I think that's something that we probably would be encouraged to at least consider. The other thing is that I believe that there's an interest, at least in some appraisers, in supervising more. And a couple of things that come to mind. One is that there may be large shops, large commercial shops, CBRE. They may have a dedicated appraiser that their whole job is to supervise trainees, or at least they could have the potential for that. And so I think that's another reason why we might consider expanding. And the other thing is that if an appraiser wishes to supervise more than 3 trainees, and he complies with all the requirements, and he produces good work with these trainees, and we have a mechanism to determine that, then I don't know that if we can free the way, then I think we should do that. And I think the question we've wrestled with was, okay, well, what are the numbers? How many, what are the requirements that additional requirements? And that's, I think, what the main concern, and I don't want to talk for the whole enforcement committee, but I think those were the questions that we felt the entire board could help us determine.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, the survey came back and you all have not yet reassembled. In other words, some data that is now available to the committee that didn't previously exist?
We have corresponded via email, the 3 of us. We have all, I believe. Chance has made some great comments. Alex has been involved. We have looked at the results. My take was I didn't sense an overwhelm. Okay, let's go back. Only 665 appraisers actually responded in the first place. And of those, not a very large number even train anybody. So my take was I didn't want to just increase the number for the sake of increasing the number unless we thought this through. I mean, if we want to go increase the number, that's great. We put additional requirements in place. We could end up, Kristen presented us with a scenario that could get us 80 new trainees. I don't have a problem with that. I just wanted the whole board to participate in this because I think we need to consider it carefully. I think we need to be constructive in how we move forward, and because obviously, well, one thing you got to understand: nobody is going to be required to have any trainees if they don't want to. If you read some of the responses, some of my concerns were a lot of the individuals, and my sense was we got a lot of responses from residential appraisers. There was an issue of risk. I mean, that was overwhelming. And the risk, my perception was some of these things that we've been dealing with in the past about the review. When that trainee turns in, there's risk this supervisory appraiser is going to be caught up in that. Other people, I guess, perceive risk at a greater point. A lot of it was time. A lot of it was the dynamics of residential appraising. A lot of these guys work out of their home, and they just don't see any sense of how they could train anybody. From the general perspective, which I think is a little bit more where Chance is coming from, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chance, I think there's a lot more opportunity, but I didn't sense we got very much response from those individuals. So I wanted to take it to the whole board to have your input here. Moving the number up, great. We have to possibly come up with some additional requirements to make sense of it. Make those people who want to do more than 3 have, meet certain requirements to make them eligible to do this. But yes, I think that we have, Chance and Alex, I think we've really looked at these results and kind of wanted to get some more input from the rest of you on the board.
Well, I would agree with you that on every observation you made, people with an individual operation doing residential appraisers, I see and hear a lot of pushback and or fear and or inefficiency and or business model problem that just doesn't work. I think why we engaged in the conversation was the hope as we look to the future about the potential for creating what I'll call enough depth or opportunity for internships, for college programs, and so if we can pave the way to those things, the concept of efficiency does become available, and Chance, you mentioned, and I have communicated with some of the larger shops to say, would you? I mean, you know, Buster, you guys are in a great position if we can figure out a way to do fellowship-type programs or internship-type programs. CBRE has expressed that they would and could do more, but they need it to be efficient. Having someone dedicated to one or two is problematic. Of course, when we think about spreading it across the whole, we don't want to have a repeat, or the reason we have the limitation, I believe, is, I don't know any other term to use other than appraiser mill. In the original certification, there were people who created what I'll call appraisal mills, which just allowed people to run out and do work that were not qualified and they weren't properly supervised. So there is that challenge, right? That's exactly where we find ourselves, is at the crossroad of how do you create an efficiency for the opportunity of expansion and don't then create the opportunity for bad acts. And I don't know what the right number is, and I don't know how to solve the problem, but I don't mind trying to be creative on the edge, if you will. I don't think the number, if you're looking for personal input, needs to be certainly any more than 5. And I have not asked those larger firms that I ask about efficiencies what that magic number is. I'm curious, has anyone else ever had any feedback from somebody in the industry that said it makes sense if I, you know, to hire a trainee supervisor if I have 3 or 10 or, Chance, do you know the number?
No, I don't.
I'm guessing that it's, I mean, if you just think about it from a practical standpoint, even if you brought them all into classroom type settings, having much more than 3, 4, or 5 looks like it'd be a handful for a single person in my mind.
This is just from my experience from folks who have talked to me, either when I'm out speaking to appraiser groups, or sometimes somebody will pick up the phone and call or drop an email, and I will pick up the phone and call them back. So I would say in the last 7 years, that's probably happened 6 or 7 times, and typically it is from a commercial shop or large residential. One of them that I can recall was from a large residential shop, and it was a very modest request to give them the opportunity, and no one, because I asked the same question. So, well, how many do you think would be reasonable? And I never had anyone say more than 5. In fact, I think that's the only answer I've ever gotten, is just give us the opportunity to do 5. I can make that work.
Madam Chair, I have another question, and it might be good for the non-appraisers. How many requirements are there in order to have a trainee other than the experience?
Do you have them available to you there, Kristen? Because there are some very specific criteria.
Hang on just a moment. Let me grab those for you.
While she's looking, you know, I think it's interesting that we have this conversation from a business standpoint, right? You think about our sister agency, if you will. Is there a limitation on the number of agents a broker can supervise?
There's not a numerical limitation. There's a practical limitation, but there's no numerical limitation.
We might, as we try to develop the concept of how these might be established in a way that's functional, that might be something for us to help if we decide to move forward at a committee level. Because one of the ways the training happens in those capacities is through mandatory training programs, and so we might think about being a bit more specific, and even then, those aren't regulated by the agency, but instead by the individual brokerage, correct? Right. Other than baseline education, continuing education requirements.
Okay, Madam Chair and board members, the specific criteria are 3 years of certified appraiser experience. So you have to be licensed as a certified appraiser for 3 years. You have to have no discipline for the last 3 years, and you have to take the 2-hour supervisory appraiser trainee course. It's an education course that we offer. And actually, it's 4 hours.
Yeah, I should have been able to recite those, having recently sponsored 3 trainees. I know I checked off on them because I met them all, but I couldn't recall them. But yeah, I agree with you, Jamie. I think 5's a good round number. I think that's what you're going to hear from most people, 5, because we can all count to 5 on one hand. I don't want to have to think if I have to go to 2 hands, if I have that many trainees, I'm in trouble. But I think for me personally, like I said, I have 3. I don't think I'd ever want more than 3, and that's just the nature of the business we do at the state agency. But I have had few instances where the topic has come up. There was also the comment about this voluntary review program where if you do go in excess of 3, and I'm assuming that if you do go to 4 or 5, that it's all of your trainees who have to participate in this program. And I did have one individual say, okay, so if that's the case, and I go and venture out on this, down this path, and they turn their stuff in, am I now going to be subject to disciplinary action as a result of this I didn't have an answer. I kind of wanted to cut that conversation off quick because, again, it goes back to why this keeps coming up. I don't know, but there is this fear out there that some of these supervisor appraisers are going to get caught up because I guess everybody believes that at some point in time we're deficient in USPAP. Whether, and it's not intentional, but it does happen from case to case. So I hear that. I've heard that more than once, but not as it pertained to this opportunity to move from 3 to possibly 4 or 5 trainees. Because if I understand right, that's what we're talking about, is making it where they have to participate in the voluntary review process, correct?
That's correct, yes. And if they do participate in that process, you will recall under that rule, even the voluntary participants are subject to complaint liability. Now, it typically occurs only in the circumstances of gross negligence or egregious violations of USPAP, just like we look for in our experience audits. We recognize that this is a training opportunity, but the appraisal subcommittee will not let us just give a free pass to someone just because they are a supervisory appraiser. And as you heard our enforcement director tell you, those experience audits are subject to the same standard, essentially.
Well, and let's be realistic. Why does it keep coming up, Buster? Because 6 times in 2014, 4 times in 2015, 4 times in 2016, and 5 times thus far in 2017, that has yielded. Now, of those, I suppose none of them were from a voluntary program, right? And so that is the gray area that we're hearing in the public. Is there more or less flexibility as it relates to gross negligence? My guess is no, but that is the problem, and maybe educationally, especially in our mandatory trainer program, maybe we should start describing what gross negligence is so that they can more clearly identify that and get over that fear.
Well, I don't really have a personal problem with increasing it. I just had this real quick question, though. Am I correct in that we went from unlimited to 3?
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Correct.
And now we're entertaining, do we want to go above 3, whether it's 4 or 5? Personally, I think 4 is kind of just, might as well go to 5 if we put the right procedures in place. And again, it's voluntary. You don't have to do this. If you want to veer down that path, then we need to put the right process in place to be sure that we don't end up where we did before. I don't think moving from 3 to 5 is the same as being unlimited.
No, and I agree. And it's interesting that the recommended motion, of course, in front of us is to tennis ball it right back to your committee. So I'm curious if you've got enough input if we do that to...
Well, my answer is no. I don't know about my other committee members, but pretty much all you've done to some degree is say, yeah, we want to look into it. I'd just like to hear some input. I mean, I know some of the other members who are not active or not actual appraisers probably are know.
Well, so you've gotten input from Chance, you've gotten input from me, you've gotten input from Ms.
I
Lynch.
agree with the 5.
Mr. Jeffries?
I'd like to, yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm sort of in the same boat that, you know, I don't think there's any magic with the number of 3. I just don't see how that makes any sense at all. And I think in terms of the moving professionalism along and getting more people in the field, if we can do that, and maybe we try 5 and see what happens. And if we come back 2 years from now and we have a tremendous amount of new complaints that center around this, we may have to look at it again, I guess. But I think my thought process is simply that 3 is not a magic number, and if 5 is permittable under the subcommittee rules, then maybe we should try that.
Mr. Schultz?
I was going to add, I mean, I agree. I would be inclined, I'm not an appraiser, obviously, I don't do these things, but I would be inclined for the reasons that Chance stated earlier to increase it, to provide that flexibility to the industry. I don't know that potentially being submitted to a complaint due to the voluntary trainee program that they would have to go through should necessarily dissuade us from increasing that number, because it's voluntary. At the end of the day, they don't have to take on any trainees, but those that can and want to can do that. The only question I have in my mind that I think we talked about briefly, and I know that Buster touched on it, was with respect to the burden that voluntary training, you know, that implementation would put on the voluntary training review process here internally with the staff, just on the number of reviews that, I mean, I know that we talked briefly about how many folks submit to that voluntarily in the first place, but if we if they're required to, if we change the rule and they're required to, then what kind of burden would that place on staff?
Let me try to address that, if I might. One thing that will not change is that the staff will engage in the normal upgrade review process when someone is ready or a trainee believes that they're ready. And they want to upgrade their license. So that will still go through the normal process. The progress review, the 2 other opportunities which are currently voluntary that will become mandatory, the reviews of those reports actually go out to the peer investigative committee members, okay, under the current process. So there won't be a significant impact on the staff.
So if it were to go back to committee, obviously you still have the opportunity to talk about number, because we would want a recommendation coming back forward, but you've gotten some feedback there. I suppose the other portion of the working tool is what, if any, additional regulations might exist if you raise the standard. And so I'd encourage, has the Washington, being the only state that has in excess of 3, have we actually circulated their additional requirements to the committee?
Yes, and their additional requirements are only that they be certified for 5 years.
So could you have a stepped process that said you can supervise up to 3 with 3 years experience, or up to 5 with 5 years experience? I mean, conceptually, is that one of the increased standards by adding additional bodies that you might do?
Yes, of course. And the Washington program it's a little more complicated, because it's not just the supervisory appraiser that has to have more experience. It's based on the experience of the trainees. And for those of you who are not appraisers, basically the biggest hurdle in training for a trainee is to do the actual inspection of the property. And that takes anywhere from 1 to 2 years to really understand that process. And so the way Washington has stepped their program, you have to have so many trainees that are at 1 year or less, so many trainees at 2 years or less, and so many trainees that have more than 2 years of experience. And that's the way they get to up to eight trainees, depending on the level of experience of each of those trainees.
Okay. And then, of course, if there were any additional criteria that we decided as a group might be important, like previous discipline for failing to properly supervise, those kinds of things might be considered at that level. But I can see where there could be some committee work creating some, at least recommendations about those increased standards.
Yeah, well, I feel a lot better just listening to everybody. I think that we are prepared to do that. I think together with staff, I think I hear overwhelmingly that the number should be or could be 5. And I think together, the committee, the 3 of us, along with staff, we could put together a set of procedures or requirements that make you eligible to take on more than 3. Well, I mean, we already have in place what it takes to do 3, so all we would do would be revising and making some requirements, additional requirements, if you would like to move to 4 or 5. I mean, I don't know if we want to split that way. We'd just say more than 3, no more, or 5, no more than 5, or I don't know. We can come up with the right wording. What I'm trying to say is, if you can't have more than 5, but if you move off of 3, this is what you got to do. This is where you have to have been, and this is what's going to be required of you. I think we can do that, and we'll be prepared. If that's the recommendation today from the board, we'll be prepared to set another meeting date and tackle it and move forward.
I would just want to add for that committee meeting that some of these recommendations be geared specifically to address the concern of these appraisal mills that I keep hearing about, including kind of explaining that more to some of us who aren't appraisers, just to understand what that whole concept was, maybe a little bit of background on what these appraisal mills were. But then specifically recommendations on what rules can be implemented to dissuade that from happening in the future if we're going to take this step.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Jeffries?
I move that the board refer this item back to the Enforcement Committee for final recommendation and propose rules or amendments to the existing rules as discussed.
A motion for Mr. Jeffries, a second for Mr. Pena. Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We'll go to agenda item number 23, discussion on legislative matters.
Madam Chair and members, this is just a placeholder in case anything came up during the special session that would affect the agency, and so far, nothing has. So
I like the efficiency of that. We'll move to agenda item number 24, update on federal rulemaking proceedings.
Madam Chair and board members, before you, in agenda item 24 is just an update on the various federal rulemaking proceedings that we have been advising you on in the recent past. There are 4 pending rulemaking proceedings at the federal level. The first is the proposed federal rule for the AMC National Registry fee. And you may recall that that particular rule was put on hold due to the change in the presidential administration, and we have been told by the appraisal subcommittee that the Office of Management and Budget from the White House has given their blessing to proceed with that rule. We have not received any word that there is actual progress on that rule, but the last word is that the appraisal subcommittee has been given approval from the White House to proceed with that rulemaking proceeding. So we expect progress eventually. With respect to the proposed changes to the appraisal subcommittee policy statements, that proposed rulemaking is essentially in the same boat, if you will. The appraisal subcommittee is our federal oversight agency, and they have 7 policy statements that our program is judged by whenever they come and do their biennial audit in even-numbered years. So we'll be having another one in FY 2018, actually coming up in February. And they have proposed some amendments to their policy statements, and they have said that they do expect a final version of that rule to be forthcoming. The next item is a proposed federal rule to increase the de minimis threshold level for commercial loans before requiring an appraisal. That threshold is currently at $250,000, and they're proposing to increase that to, I believe it's $400,000. That proposal is actually included in your materials because it's not something that we have presented to you before. And it's being proposed by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency within the Department of the Treasury, the Federal Reserve System, and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, more commonly referred to as the FDIC. So that's a movement at the federal level to raise the threshold of the loan amount before requiring an appraisal. Then the last federal rulemaking proceeding is probably the one that is of the most interest to our license holders, and perhaps the one that's of most interest to the board, and that is the proposed AQB changes to the real property appraiser qualifications criteria. You may recall that the last exposure draft, the AQB proposed reducing the hours of experience required for each of the license categories to obtain your appraiser credential. In addition, the AQB had proposed the creation of practical courses to substitute for the one-on-one experience that a trainee typically gets from their supervisory appraiser. We have received word from the AQB that they have pulled back on those proposed changes and will not be going forward with those proposed changes until their meeting in February at the earliest. Their current plan is to create a focus group to further study those proposals that were included in the exposure draft before proceeding with changes to the appraiser qualifications criteria.
Madam Chairman, a question, please.
Mr. Bolton?
Do those proposals also include the reduced educational requirements? Is it, I think it was for residential license that for certified residential. I've seen proposals that they reduce the requirement from a bachelor's degree to an associate's degree, and maybe it was licensed residential. I'm not sure, but do you recall those proposals?
Yes, they do include some rollback of the college degree requirements.
But those are on postponed as well.
Yes, everything in that exposure draft has been postponed, and the AQB does not anticipate moving forward with any of those proposals until April at the earliest.
Thank you.
Does anyone know what the criteria is to be on the focus group? And if Texas has any representation there?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay. I'm going to make an attempt to outreach and find out. And I'll report back to the commissioner. He can then communicate with you all.
We do have representation on the AQB.
Right. A single individual serving on that board.
Correct.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name. Do you?
Mark Lewis? Yeah, Mark Lewis, yeah.
So Mark Lewis is from Texas and currently serves on the AQB board, but I think it would be interesting to have at least a voice in the conversation. So we'll see what we can do about understanding at least who's on the focus group and how we might communicate with those individuals. If you have individual concerns, you may reach out to our Texas resident, Mark Lewis.
And that's it.
Well, that was exciting and fun. Thank you, Kristen. We will move to agenda item number 25, discussion and possible action regarding the self-evaluation report to be submitted to the Sunset Advisory Commission.
Madam Chair and members, just to add one more comment, this was directly from the AQB. When they decided not to go forward, they said the only thing we've reached consensus on is that there is no consensus. Every 12 years in the state of Texas, every agency is subject to something called sunset review, and that requires a legislative reauthorization of the agency. Prior to the agency being authorized to continue in existence, the agency goes through a process that includes, or begins with, a self-evaluation report. It goes through a series of visits from the Sunset staff, Sunset Committee staff, Sunset Commission staff, sorry. And will also include a series of public hearings for stakeholders that's conducted by the Sunset Commission. And then there will be a final report that the Sunset Commission puts together, the staff puts together recommendation for the Sunset Commission, which consists of both representatives from the House and the Senate in the legislature, so that there is, and it's bipartisan, not only both bodies, but also bipartisan. And so it's meant to reach a consensus, if you will, about what needs to change before or upon reauthorization of the agency. So that the very first step in that is to just gather information. And so we have done or have begun the process, self-evaluation report. You received a copy of that by email. It's a long report, but mostly it's just asking for data. So how are you organized? How do you measure your progress? How do you show that you are in fact, what is your mission? How do you in fact show that you are upholding your mission? All of those kinds of things. So that's just factual data. There's a couple of areas in the self-evaluation report that in my judgment require endorsement of this body. Now, none of those are new. None of those are new, but we're talking about forward-looking policy statements, very similar to what this body does when it authorizes the strategic plan each year, or every 2 years. So, for example, we have, based on our workshop last fall, we agreed to proceed at your direction on some policy related initiatives, such as continuing to explore whether or not the property tax consultants would be better housed under the board's jurisdiction than under TDLR or under this agency's jurisdiction, because so many of the practitioners of tax-related work are either hold broker's licenses or hold appraisal licenses. So there's a lot of overlap there. That's just probably the most prominent example of the kinds of things that are policy initiatives that we would like the board to again say, yes, include that in the report for discussion. Because this is one of those opportunities when a third party will actually get, outside of the political process, a third party will actually get to weigh in on whether that makes sense or not from a general policy perspective. The Sunset Commission, that is a role that they undertake when reviewing agencies. So the placement of this item on the agenda is simply a recommendation that that this body delegate to the chair or at the chair's discretion to the entire executive committee a review of any of those policy-related items that will be part of the self-evaluation report. So any of those statements about what we really think from a policy initiative should remain on the table for discussion. So that's the, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. The reason for the timing and the delegation is that this self-evaluation report is due back to the Sunset Commission on September the 1st. And so we only have a couple of weeks left. We're still in the process of finalizing the data, because there's a lot of data that goes into the report. But I will tell you that the only policy-related issues that are currently spoken of in the report suggested that they continue. One is an observation, one is the example that I just gave, that the property tax consultant license field would be better housed under this agency, or at least that consideration. And then secondly, when they talk about barriers, one of the questions that they ask is a barrier to the agency achieving its mission. And I acknowledged in there, I just put 3 notes about barriers. And one is rapid technology change in the industry that requires us to reallocate resources. But while we acknowledge that challenge, the fact that we're SDSI actually gives us the tools to do that. If we need to staff up in a particular area, we don't have to wait until an LAR, legislative appropriations request of the legislature, some other time to hire another person, or to exceed our FTE cap, which is, we don't have one as an SDSI agency. We hire the people that we need, and that's all we hire. The other 2 are their editorial comments more than anything else, and that is the gridlock in Washington. That is really keeping keeping Congress from actually accomplishing anything. And then secondly, which there's not anything that Sunset Review can do about that. So that's why I say it's more editorial. And then the second is is closely related to that, and that is the current appraiser regulatory, the federal regulatory oversight structure, or the federal regulatory scheme for appraisers is significantly broken. It has significant limitations. Not a lot, again, that we can do about it. But I think it's the kind of thing that the state legislature may not be well aware of, and so I think it's probably worthwhile putting that, including that editorial comment in the report. Those are the only policy-related items that are currently planned to be in the report. If this body has any other suggested things, we would certainly welcome that, but because the time is short, that whatever discussion is had today, we still need to delegate either to the chair or to the executive committee the final approval of those items so that we can file this report timely. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we do need to take action on that particular item, so what is the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I move that the board authorize the chair, or at the chair's discretion, the executive committee to approve the final self-evaluation report to be submitted to the Sunset Advisory Commission on or before September 1st, 2017.
A second.
We have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Move to agenda item number 26, discussion regarding the annual internal audit.
Is it on?
That is.
Okay. All right, Priscilla Pifo again, Director of Staff and Support Services. We have before you the internal audit that was performed for us by McConnell Jones. It has been presented to the commission and approved. They followed an audit plan which they had proposed and we had approved. It had been approved. Starting on page 249 is the first audit. This is the one of the Public Funds Investment Act. They found the agency to be generally in compliance with one exception, and that is that we are doing all of the training that we're required to do. We simply need to inform the board and the commission that we are doing it. Then the second part of the audit is the financial financial information systems on page 258, 259, and you'll see there some recommendations that they have for improvements. There are 12 recommendations. 4 of them are already implemented or in process, and the others are being considered. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have at this time.
As part of the ongoing process, I noted that there was some concern about, I suppose, training or cross-training as it relates to the integration between an old system and a new system that we adapted to the Versa system in 2009.
Yes, that is our system. That is a licensing database system of record. And the challenge for the accounting system has been to integrate with that system that was not designed to be an accounting system, but it's how all of our revenue is received, both online and then and checks that are received. And so it kind of is a de facto accounting system against which we would like to be in reconciling. So it's a constant kind of dance to get all these systems to work together.
Yes, I've had that great pleasure before, so I understand that it's a long and slow process, but we're continuing, I'm assuming, to develop on our own some
Yes.
systems that allow for the integration between the two.
Yes, Director of IT and I are working very closely together, and we have one project that we are implementing right now that we will use throughout the whole year and see how that works to integrate the systems together, and then we'll start using it exclusively.
Maybe you can use our board and group as the small-scale version test, right? Since you probably get a few less checks from us to have to
Be wonderful, wouldn't it?
to manage on a daily basis. And so I see the recommendations that they've made, and I think they make sense, certainly the things that they're suggesting that we do. I can only assume that we're making forward progress on each of those.
We are.
Perfect. Any other questions of staff? Thank you.
Thank you.
Moves to the agenda item number 27, to request for potential future meeting agenda items. Are there items that the board would like to see addressed on a future agenda? Now, I'll thank the staff for making sure that the items we requested at our last meeting were addressed at this meeting. I appreciate the efficiencies of that. Hearing none, we'll move to agenda item number 28, discussion and possible action to schedule future meeting dates.
If I might, we have, as you recall from our last meeting, we had reserved 2 potential dates for this room, where the room had availability. That was the 6th, Monday the 6th of November, and Friday the 17th of November. And so it's really the board's pleasure which of those 2 dates serves more of the board members' needs.
Floor is open for discussion.
I defer to Mr. Black since,
Well, I mean, I think it's a crazy month for us all. So, I mean, obviously, I think in discussions I've had with folks, the weekend in between there, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, but that would be my preference and folks as well. But I think we looked into the 9th and it's not available, right? So, I mean.
None of those days are available. This room is available.
So the 6th, the 17th, those are the choices.
Yeah, just whatever y'all want to do. I'm going to do my best to be here.
I just have one suggestion in the future, and I will also make it a point to be here. But Mondays are a very difficult day for my business. There always seems to be a staff meeting or a particular issue that comes up over appraisers working over the weekend. And it's really hard for me personally to be out of my office on a Monday, but, I will make a point to be here if that works for everybody better than that.
Is there a possibility of an alternative state facility? One for instance is, and I realize this may not be an agency or other agency, we could meet at the Bob Bullock, for instance. I mean, they have area and facilities or some other agency's room. Is that possible?
So there are possibilities, and in fact, we looked into this morning. We had this discussion in the budget committee as well, and we looked into alternative facilities around the 9th was the other day that was suggested, or the 13th. The problem with the 13th is that's the commission meeting date. So, and they always meet on Mondays. And so there was no availability on the 9th of alternative meeting space. So right now, since we actually need to make this decision today, those are the only two choices that we have.
So we got, sounds like one voice for the 17th. Anyone else have strong?
My vote is for the 17th.
I vote for the 17th.
2 voices, 3 voices, sounding like that's leaning that direction. 17th cause anyone direct conflict?
Well, it does me, but it's just a crazy November. I get my son actually on that day, but maybe I'll bring him to Austin
I
with
was
me.
going to say, fly him to Austin and let him observe this. He'll be quite impressed.
That's fine. I would echo what Martha said as well, though I know I alluded to that as well in the May meeting. But Fridays work really the best for me, no question about it, if we can do that. It just, my phone's blowing up right now. I know everyone's Mondays are crazy, and then I'm a 6-hour commute any way you cut it. And it's not every time that I will tie a trip to Austin into the board meeting, but it's nice to be able to do that. And then there are occasions like this one where I actually drove in yesterday, and that wasn't the fondest thing that I'd prefer to do that on a Thursday as opposed to a Friday, and then I'm going to blaze out of here right now to try to beat traffic. So in those particular times, it is nice to be able to do it on a Thursday, Friday as opposed to a Sunday, Monday. So for, future meetings. So maybe we could get something like May the 18th, that Friday, on the agenda after we address this, and February as well, because I think we discussed February. So, but the 17th will work if that's what we need to do for November.
So Commissioner, book the room for the 17th.
Okay. Well, what we'll do is release the room for the 6th, since we had held those 2 dates. Then the next meeting is, we're proposing for Thursday, the 8th of February. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that the commission meeting is on Monday the 12th, because the winter meeting of the Association of Realtors is the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. The 9th, if we repeat our arrangement from last year, would include the Residential Realty Summit on the 9th. And so if you came in and had a meeting on Thursday, you could stay over and attend the summit on Friday. That's one reason. The second reason, which is in some ways more important, and that is that ASC, the Appraisal Subcommittee, will be in the House conducting their biennial visit and audit of our procedures. That standards audit, Monday the 5th through Thursday the 8th, and they request that a meeting be held while they're here. The last day is the best day, so they can actually report tentative results, and so that all works out.
Sounds good.
Yeah, February 8th sounds great to me.
So everyone block February the 8th and 9th so that you can participate in the summit.
It was fun last year, or this year. I enjoyed it. Could we look at Friday, May the 18th, since we're being proactive and get it reserved? I know the weekend before is Mother's Day, so that doesn't work. Then the following would be Memorial Day weekend, which is kind of holiday weekend, but would Friday, May the 18th, could we get that reserved?
So what is most likely, and we'll have to look it up, but I'm going to guess that's UT graduation. Oh, it says it right there. UT graduation. There won't be any rooms.
Okay. Well, then the weekend before is Mother's Day.
What about May 4th?
Yeah, the 4th. Would the 4th work?
Yes, that would be Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. Yeah. Yes.
Slow.
Could we get the room reserved?
If you guys, if you're willing to lock in, we will check right away. Okay.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Future agenda items? The time is about 20 minutes until 1 o'clock, and we will consider this meeting of the TALCB adjourned.